The story of Sodom and Gomorrah has often been simplified or misinterpreted over time, with many believing that their destruction was solely due to sexual sins, particularly homosexuality. This interpretation has been widely accepted for centuries, but a closer look at the biblical text reveals a much deeper moral and social lesson. Rather than focusing only on sexual immorality, the true sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was their widespread corruption, injustice, and lack of hospitality. The Bible describes these cities as places where violence, selfishness, and cruelty dominated society. One of the most significant aspects of their wrongdoing was the mistreatment of foreigners and the poor, which was a direct violation of ancient societal values. In many biblical references, the sins of these cities are linked to oppression, arrogance, and disregard for justice, rather than a single act of sexual misconduct. The story serves as a powerful warning about the consequences of moral decay and the collapse of social responsibility. When a civilization prioritizes personal gain over compassion, fairness, and respect for others, it inevitably faces destruction. The real message behind Sodom and Gomorrah is not merely about individual sins, but about the failure of an entire society to uphold justice and human dignity. By understanding the broader moral lesson, we can apply these teachings to our modern world. It challenges us to reflect on how we treat the vulnerable, whether we promote fairness, and whether our society upholds the values of justice, kindness, and hospitality. Ultimately, this story is not just about punishment, but a lesson in morality, responsibility, and the importance of ethical living. The prosperity and corruption of Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah were two ancient cities located in southeastern Canaan near the Dead Sea. Their strategic position along a major trade route connecting Egypt and Mesopotamia made them centers of economic prosperity. Trade caravans frequently passed through these cities, bringing wealth and cultural influence from different parts of the ancient world. The region was known for its fertile land and natural resources, which contributed to their economic success. However, despite their material wealth and strong commercial ties, Sodom and Gomorrah became symbols of moral and social decay in biblical history. While the cities thrived economically, they failed to uphold justice, hospitality, and ethical governance. Ancient societies placed great importance on hospitality, as travelers and foreigners relied on the kindness of locals for shelter and protection. However, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah became notorious for their inhospitable and cruel behavior, refusing to extend basic human kindness to outsiders. Instead of offering help to those in need, the citizens engaged in acts of greed, arrogance, and oppression, exploiting the weak rather than assisting them. Beyond their lack of hospitality, these cities were plagued by social corruption and injustice. The biblical narrative describes them as places where violence, selfish indulgence, and a disregard for moral values were widespread. The wealthy elite enjoyed luxury, but at the cost of the poor and marginalized, who were ignored or mistreated. The people prioritized their own desires over communal well-being, creating a deeply unjust society that abandoned ethical responsibility. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, as described in the Bible, was not merely a punishment for isolated sins, but a reflection of a civilization that had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Their downfall serves as a warning about the consequences of ignoring justice, compassion, and social responsibility. Despite their economic power, their refusal to uphold fundamental values of kindness, fairness, and moral integrity led to their ultimate destruction. This story remains relevant today, reminding us that true prosperity is not measured by wealth alone, but by how a society treats its most vulnerable members. Economic success without ethical principles can lead to societal decay. The lessons from Sodom and Gomorrah challenge us to reflect on the importance of justice, hospitality, and human dignity in creating a fair and sustainable world. The true reasons behind the fall of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is one of the most well-known accounts in the Bible, often cited as an example of divine judgment against sin. However, over time, the narrative has been oversimplified and misinterpreted, with many people believing that the cities were destroyed solely because of sexual immorality, particularly homosexuality. While the Bible does mention immoral behavior, the true reasons for the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah go far beyond issues of sexuality. The biblical text describes a society that had become morally bankrupt, socially unjust, and utterly inhospitable, leading to its ultimate destruction. Widespread social and moral corruption. The primary reason for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was their deep-rooted social and moral corruption. According to the Bible, these cities were places where greed, arrogance, cruelty, and selfishness flourished. Rather than creating a just and equitable society, the residents prioritized their own pleasure and power, neglecting the well-being of others. This selfish attitude led to social decay, where the strong dominated the weak and those in need were left unprotected. The prophet Ezekiel provides an essential insight into the true sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. In Ezekiel 16:49-50, it is written, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen." This passage makes it clear that the destruction of Sodom was not just about one particular sin, but rather about the city's entire culture of corruption and disregard for justice. The people were wealthy and comfortable, yet they refused to care for the poor, oppressed, and vulnerable. Instead of using their prosperity to help those in need, they became arrogant and indifferent to the suffering of others. Their moral failures extended beyond private actions. They corrupted the very fabric of their society, making it an unsafe and unjust place for all. Violence and injustice. The oppression of the poor and foreigners, another major reason for the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah, was their violence and injustice. Biblical accounts highlight the oppression of the poor and the mistreatment of foreigners, two grave sins in ancient societies. In a time when traveling was dangerous and people relied on the kindness of strangers, Sodom and Gomorrah became infamous for their hostility and cruelty toward outsiders. Instead of offering protection and hospitality, they sought to harm those who entered their cities. The book of Genesis 18:19 describes how God, upon hearing the cries of the oppressed, decided to investigate the cities. This suggests that the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah were not just personal moral failings, but widespread acts of cruelty and injustice that affected many people. The fact that the outcries reached God emphasizes the severity of their wrongdoing. Innocent victims were suffering, and their cries for justice were heard. Violence was not just an isolated incident in these cities, it was part of their culture. The people of Sodom did not respect the rule of law or basic human dignity. Instead, they used their power to dominate, exploit, and oppress others, showing no concern for morality or righteousness. This breakdown of justice was one of the main reasons why the cities were destroyed. Lack of hospitality, the ultimate sign of moral decay. One of the most shocking aspects of the Sodom and Gomorrah story is the way the people treated visitors. When two angels, disguised as men, arrived in Sodom and were welcomed into Lot's home, the people of the city reacted with extreme hostility. Instead of respecting the cultural expectation of hospitality, they attempted to abuse the visitors, demonstrating complete disregard for ancient values of kindness and respect. In ancient times, hospitality was one of the most sacred duties. It was not merely a polite custom, but a moral obligation. Protecting strangers, especially travelers, was essential for survival in harsh environments. Cities and communities that embraced hospitality were seen as just and righteous, while those that rejected it were viewed as corrupt and dangerous. The men of Sodom, by attempting to violate the angelic visitors, symbolized the complete moral failure of their society. Their actions were not about sexuality alone, but about brutality, dominance, and cruelty. This moment in the story highlights the depth of their inhumanity. They were willing to harm innocent strangers simply because they had the power to do so. This lack of hospitality was not just an individual failing, but a collective reflection of a city that had abandoned all ethical principles. Instead of protecting the vulnerable, they sought to exploit them. Instead of welcoming outsiders, they terrorized them. Their disregard for human dignity and justice was ultimately what led to their destruction by divine judgment. The true meaning of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction. Understanding the story of Sodom and Gomorrah requires looking beyond the simplified version that focuses solely on sexual immorality. The Bible's emphasis is on the wider social and moral corruption that led to the city's downfall. These cities were destroyed not just because of one sin, but because they had become places of violence, injustice, selfishness, and cruelty. Their failure to care for the poor, their mistreatment of foreigners, and their rejection of hospitality were the defining features of their downfall. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not simply an act of divine punishment, but a consequence of a society that had completely abandoned righteousness. Lessons from Sodom and Gomorrah. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a warning not only about divine judgment, but also about the consequences of social injustice and moral failure. It teaches that a society cannot survive if it is built on oppression, cruelty, and selfishness. A civilization that turns away from justice, compassion, and hospitality will ultimately face its own destruction. This lesson remains relevant today. Are we living in societies that care for the weak, the poor, and the oppressed? Do we treat foreigners and outsiders with respect and dignity? Are we cultivating a culture of kindness, fairness, and hospitality? The fall of Sodom and Gomorrah reminds us that prosperity without morality is meaningless. It challenges us to reflect on our own communities and ensure that we uphold the values of justice, kindness, and respect for others. It is not about condemning specific actions, but about creating a society that values humanity and righteousness above all else. By studying the real message behind Sodom and Gomorrah, we can learn that the strength of a civilization is not measured by its wealth, but by its commitment to justice and compassion. Only by maintaining these principles can we build a better, more just world for all. Lot, a righteous man in a corrupt city. The story of Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah is one of the most compelling narratives in the Bible, offering deep moral and spiritual lessons. Lot, described as a righteous man, played a crucial role in the events leading up to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. His actions, particularly his hospitality and protection of the angelic visitors, serve as a powerful contrast to the wickedness of the city's inhabitants. Furthermore, his wife's disobedience and looking back as they fled from the destruction symbolizes the dangers of attachment to a corrupt past. Lot's righteousness in the midst of wickedness. Lot was the nephew of Abraham, one of the most revered figures in biblical history. When Abraham and Lot parted ways due to their growing wealth and the need for more space for their flocks, Lot chose to settle in Sodom, a city known for its prosperity but also its deep moral corruption. Despite the city's notorious reputation, Lot managed to maintain his integrity and faith in God. The book of Genesis describes Lot as a man who still upheld moral values even though he lived in a city that had abandoned them. Unlike the other residents of Sodom, Lot displayed kindness and hospitality, values that were fundamental in ancient Near Eastern culture. His commitment to righteousness is evident when two angelic visitors, disguised as men, arrived in Sodom. Recognizing them as travelers in need of shelter, Lot invited them into his home, offering them protection and hospitality. Lot's hospitality and protection of the angels. Hospitality was a sacred duty in ancient times, particularly in a world where travel was dangerous, and weary travelers relied on the kindness of strangers for survival. A righteous person was expected to provide food, shelter, and protection to guests, ensuring their safety from any harm. Lot, in keeping with this tradition, welcomed the two angels into his home and prepared a feast for them. Genesis 19:3. However, Sodom was a city that had abandoned all sense of morality and regarded visitors as targets rather than guests. Soon after the angels arrived, a violent mob of men from Sodom gathered outside Lot's house. They demanded that Lot hand over the visitors so they could abuse them, demonstrating their cruelty, hostility toward outsiders, and utter disregard for righteousness. This moment revealed the depth of Sodom's wickedness. Rather than being a safe haven for travelers, it had become a place of extreme depravity and injustice. Lot, despite being outnumbered and facing an angry crowd, risked his own safety to protect the visitors. He pleaded with the men of Sodom not to commit such a wicked act, emphasizing that the angels were under his protection. His actions demonstrated incredible courage and moral conviction, as he stood up against an entire city that had lost its ethical foundation. Lot's willingness to defend the innocent, even at great personal risk, is one of the most important lessons in this story. He could have easily given in to fear or peer pressure, but instead, he chose to do what was right. His actions serve as a testament to the importance of standing up for righteousness. Even when surrounded by corruption and injustice, the angels saved Lot and his family. The mob outside Lot's house became increasingly violent, refusing to listen to his pleas, At that moment, the angels intervened, striking the men with blindness so they could no longer find the door to Lot's house. Genesis 19:11. This supernatural act protected Lot and his family from immediate danger, but it also served as a symbol of divine justice. The wickedness of Sodom had reached a point where destruction was inevitable. The angels then warned Lot that Sodom and Gomorrah were about to be destroyed. They instructed him to gather his family and flee before the cities were consumed by fire and brimstone. However, Lot hesitated, possibly due to his deep-rooted ties to the city. The angels, in an act of mercy, took him, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand and led them out of Sodom. Genesis 19:16. This act illustrates that even the righteous can sometimes struggle with letting go of a corrupt environment, but divine guidance can help them find the right path. Lot's wife and the danger of looking back. As Lot and his family fled, the angels gave them a direct and urgent command: do not look back and do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away. Genesis 19:17. The instruction was clear: Sodom and Gomorrah were about to be destroyed. And looking back would mean clinging to the past rather than embracing a new beginning. Despite this warning, Lot's wife disobeyed. As they were escaping, she turned back to look at the city, and as a result, she was turned into a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. This moment is one of the most symbolic aspects of the story, carrying a profound lesson about the dangers of attachment to a corrupt past. Lot's wife's action can be interpreted in several ways. Longing for a sinful past, her decision to look back suggests that she still had emotional ties to Sodom, a city that represented wealth, comfort, and familiarity despite its corruption. Resistance to change. She may have struggled to fully embrace the new life ahead, representing how some people find it difficult to let go of old ways, even when those ways are destructive. A warning about disobedience. Her transformation into a pillar of salt serves as a reminder that disobedience to divine instruction can have severe consequences. Lot's wife's fate serves as a powerful metaphor. It warns against holding on to destructive habits, relationships, and environments. In many ways, the lesson applies to modern life as well. People who cling to the past, whether through regret, nostalgia, or reluctance to change, may struggle to move forward. The lessons from Lot's story. The story of Lot, his protection of the angels, and the fate of his wife contains several key moral lessons. Hospitality and kindness are sacred. Lot's willingness to welcome and protect strangers reflects the ancient belief in the sanctity of hospitality. Even today, offering kindness to outsiders and the vulnerable is a fundamental moral value. Righteousness requires courage. Lot's stand against the wicked mob illustrates that being righteous often requires great personal sacrifice and bravery. Standing up for what is right, even when surrounded by corruption, is one of the hardest but most important virtues. Attachment to the past can be destructive. Lot's wife's downfall highlights the danger of clinging to an old way of life that no longer serves us. In order to embrace a better future, we must be willing to let go of what holds us back. Divine justice is inevitable. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a warning that societies built on cruelty, injustice, and moral decay cannot stand forever. The ultimate fate of Sodom reinforces the idea that corruption leads to downfall. A timeless story with modern relevance. The story of Lot and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is more than just an ancient tale. It is a timeless lesson about morality, justice, and transformation. Lot's courage in protecting the angels, his struggle to leave behind a corrupt society, and his wife's inability to let go all provide valuable insights into the human experience. Even today, people face moral dilemmas, difficult decisions, and the temptation to hold on to past habits or environments that may not be good for them. The story of Lot reminds us that righteousness requires action, that justice demands courage, and that true transformation is only possible when we are willing to leave behind what no longer serves us. The fall of Sodom and Gomorrah, a lesson beyond divine punishment. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is often interpreted as a divine punishment, but a deeper analysis reveals that it was also the natural consequence of a morally and socially corrupt civilization. The cities had abandoned fundamental values such as justice, hospitality, and compassion, leading to an inevitable collapse. This narrative serves as both a historical warning and a moral lesson, illustrating that societies built on oppression and selfishness will ultimately face destruction. Fire and sulfur, a symbol of purification and justice. The fire and sulfur that consumed Sodom and Gomorrah are not just elements of destruction, they symbolize purification. Throughout history, fire has often represented divine judgment, renewal, and the cleansing of corruption. In this context, the fire that rained down on the cities can be seen as a symbolic act of purification, removing a civilization that had strayed too far from righteousness. Rather than an act of simple divine wrath, it was a necessary reset, illustrating that a society built on injustice and cruelty cannot endure, a metaphor for societal collapse. Beyond religious significance, the fall of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a universal metaphor for the downfall of any civilization that loses its moral foundation. History has shown that societies that abandon justice, equality, and kindness often experience internal decay, leading to their eventual collapse. When a culture prioritizes self-interest over collective well-being, disregards the poor and vulnerable, and thrives on violence and exploitation, it sets itself on a path to destruction. This lesson remains relevant today. Modern societies, much like Sodom and Gomorrah, face moral dilemmas that test their ability to uphold justice and compassion. The story warns that when corruption, oppression, and moral decay become the norm, collapse is not just possible, it is inevitable. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is more than just a biblical tale of punishment. It is a profound lesson on the dangers of moral and social corruption. Whether in ancient times or today, societies that abandon justice and compassion will ultimately face the consequences of their own actions. This story challenges us to reflect on our own communities and strive to uphold values that sustain a just and humane world. A lesson from Sodom and Gomorrah, the consequences of societal failure. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is often simplified as a condemnation of specific sins, but its deeper meaning lies in the failure of an entire society. It was not just about individual immorality, but about a collective collapse of justice, hospitality, and compassion. The Bible portrays these cities as places where violence, oppression, and disregard for the vulnerable had become the norm. Their destruction was not merely a punishment for isolated acts, but rather the inevitable downfall of a civilization that had abandoned its moral foundation. The fate of societies that ignore justice. History has shown that societies that ignore justice, neglect the poor, and exploit the weak ultimately collapse. When greed, selfishness, and cruelty replace compassion and fairness, civilizations weaken from within. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah were known for mistreating foreigners, abusing power, and disregarding their moral obligations. Their downfall serves as a warning that no society can survive long if it rejects the values that sustain peace and harmony. This lesson is still relevant today. Communities that prioritize wealth and power over ethics and social responsibility often experience deep divisions, unrest, and eventual decline. The fall of Sodom and Gomorrah reminds us that a nation's strength does not lie solely in its prosperity, but in its ability to care for the most vulnerable and uphold justice for all. Lot, a symbol of moral resistance. In contrast to the corruption around him, Lot serves as an example of moral resistance. He welcomed and protected the angelic visitors, showing hospitality and righteousness in a city that had lost its way. Despite being surrounded by injustice, he remained faithful to moral principles, risking his own safety to defend what was right. Lot's story is a powerful reminder that even in times of widespread corruption, individuals can still choose to stand for justice. His escape from destruction symbolizes the importance of remaining steadfast in one's values, even when society falls apart. His wife's fate, turning into a pillar of salt for looking back, serves as a warning against clinging to a corrupt past. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not just about divine judgment, but a lesson on societal failure. It warns us that communities that reject justice and neglect the vulnerable are destined to collapse. However, it also teaches that even in a corrupt world, individuals can stand firm in their morals. Like Lot, we are called to resist moral decay and uphold righteousness, ensuring that our societies do not fall into the same fate. Are we repeating Sodom's mistakes? A call for moral responsibility. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not just an ancient warning. It is a lesson that remains relevant today. As we look at the world around us, we must ask, are we repeating the mistakes of Sodom? Rising social injustice, inequality, and disregard for the vulnerable are clear signs that many societies today are facing the same moral and ethical decline. The biblical account of Sodom's downfall was not just about personal sins, but about a society that failed to uphold justice, hospitality, and compassion. When power is abused, when the weak are ignored, and when selfishness overtakes kindness, destruction is inevitable. Hope and the power of individual choices. However, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is not just about destruction, it also offers a message of hope and transformation. Lot's escape from the doomed city symbolizes that righteousness is always a choice. Even when surrounded by corruption, individuals can still choose to act with integrity, kindness, and justice. Just as Lot was given a way out, people today have the power to resist moral decay and work toward a better, more just society. We often believe that large-scale change is beyond our control, but history has proven that even one act of kindness or justice can spark transformation. Lot's choice to protect the angels, despite the risks, showed that standing for what is right matters, even when the world around us is hostile to goodness. Our moral responsibility. Every individual bears a moral responsibility to create a just world. The lesson of Sodom and Gomorrah teaches that societies collapse not just because of the actions of the wicked, but because of the silence and inaction of the righteous. Each act of compassion, fairness, and justice contributes to positive change. Instead of ignoring injustice, we must stand for what is right, ensuring that kindness and righteousness prevail over cruelty and selfishness. Sodom and Gomorrah fell because they abandoned the fundamental values of justice and empathy. If we do not learn from history, we risk facing the same fate. However, like Lot, we have the power to choose a different path, one of righteousness, moral responsibility, and hope. By standing for justice and practicing kindness, we can build a world that does not repeat Sodom's mistakes, but instead embraces the values that lead to true prosperity and peace. Acting for justice, a call to uphold compassion and integrity. In a world where social injustice and inequality continue to rise, it is crucial to act for justice by protecting the weak and upholding fairness in society. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a reminder that a society that neglects the vulnerable and embraces selfishness is bound to fall. True righteousness is not just about personal morality, but also about standing up for those who cannot defend themselves. We must be voices for the oppressed, challenge injustice, and promote fairness in all aspects of life. Learning from history. A path to moral strength. The Bible teaches that moral decay leads to destruction. By learning from history, we can avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. Compassion, integrity, and kindness should guide our actions. The fall of Sodom was not just about wrongdoing, but about the failure to uphold justice and hospitality. To prevent similar downfalls in our communities, we must embrace values that prioritize kindness, honesty, and responsibility. Spreading awareness. Encouraging reflection and action. Change begins with awareness. It is essential to engage in discussions on biblical teachings and moral lessons, helping others understand the importance of justice and compassion. By sharing knowledge and spreading awareness, we inspire others to reflect on their actions and take steps toward building a better, more righteous world. Together, we can create a society that values fairness, protects the weak, and fosters moral integrity.